the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species acknowledge. Some battles are won not with the mightiest weapons, but with the fiercest hearts. The Galactic Council had catalogued over 10,000 sentient species, each with their own strengths, their own legends, their own warriors. Yet none had prepared them for what would emerge from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. They called humans the silent species, not because they couldn't speak, but because when they finally did, the universe trembled. This is the story of how one human's voice, long suppressed and ignored, became the war cry that shattered the chains of oppression across 1,000 worlds. This is the story of Lieutenant Sarah Chen, whose battle name would echo through the cosmos long after the last shot was fired. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one that makes the loudest noise. It's the one that's been silent for too long. Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the observation deck, watching the Zeltharian battleships maneuver through the asteroid field like predators circling wounded prey. The massive vessels, each the size of a small moon, moved with an elegance that belied their destructive purpose. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly blue-green luminescence, while weapon ports along their sides bristled like the spines of some cosmic sea urchin. Sarah had been stationed aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge for 18 months now, serving as a tactical observer for the Terran Defense Corps. Her official role was to monitor and report on galactic military movements, but in reality, she had become something far less glamorous, a silent witness to humanity's gradual marginalization in the cosmic community. The Galactic Council meetings played out the same way every time. The Zeltharians, with their towering 7-foot frames and crystalline skin, would speak in their melodious, multi-tonal language about expansion and security. The insectoid Kresh would click and buzz their responses, their compound eyes glittering with calculated intelligence. The gaseous ethereals would float in their containment suits, their thoughts transmitted directly through quantum neural links. And the humans would sit quietly at the far end of the table, nodding politely while being systematically excluded from every meaningful decision. Sarah pulled her hand away from the wall, leaving a brief fog of condensation that quickly evaporated. She turned from the viewport and walked through the ship's corridor, her soft-soled boots making barely a whisper against the deck plating. Everything about human technology seemed designed to minimize their presence, from their quiet engines to their muted communications arrays. Even their ships were painted in neutral grays and blues, colors that seemed to apologize for existing. The conference room buzzed with activity as various species prepared for another session of what the Council generously called collaborative governance. Sarah took her usual position near the back wall, behind the Terran delegation. Ambassador Harrison Wells, a career diplomat with silver hair and worry lines etched deep around his eyes, was reviewing his notes one final time. His aide, Commander Martinez, sat rigid in his dress uniform, his jaw clenched as he watched the other species' representatives file in. The Zeltharian delegation entered first, their leader, High Commander Zexhai, moving with the fluid grace that marked his species. His skin shifted from deep blue to pale green as he surveyed the room, a sign of what humans had learned to interpret as controlled aggression. Behind him came his war council, each bearing the ritual scarification that marked their military achievements. Sarah counted at least 30 combat ribbons between them, representing victories against species that had dared to resist Zeltharian expansion. The Kresh arrived next, their chitinous forms clicking against the deck as they took their positions. Their leader, Queen Mindscrix, was an impressive specimen even by Kresh standards. Standing nearly 6 feet tall on her forelegs, her exoskeleton bore the deep purple markings of noble birth. Her mandibles moved constantly, creating a subsonic humming that humans felt more than heard. Sarah knew from intelligence reports that Queen Mindscrix controlled a hive consciousness spanning over 40 billion individuals across 7 star systems. The ethereals drifted in last, their containment suits humming with the energy required to maintain their coherent form. They had no single leader, instead operating as a collective consciousness that could split and merge at will. Today, they had chosen to manifest as 3 distinct entities, each representing a different aspect of their civilization's priorities: military, economic, and philosophical. Ambassador Wells stood as High Commander Zexhai called the session to order. The universal translator rendered the Zeltharians' words into crisp, emotionless English. The Council recognizes the assembled delegations. Today's agenda concerns the territorial disputes in the Kepler sector and the ongoing refugee crisis on Altai Prime. Sarah had heard variations of this same discussion dozens of times. The Zeltharians would present their position, usually involving the absorption of contested territories into their expanding empire for security purposes. The Kresh would counter with economic arguments, calculating the resource value of each disputed world, down to the last ton of rare minerals. The Ethereals would offer philosophical observations about the nature of expansion and conquest, speaking in metaphors that meant everything and nothing, and the humans would listen. Ambassador Wells requested permission to speak, raising his hand in the submissive gesture that the Council required from junior members. The Terran Federation would like to propose an alternative solution to the Kepler situation, he began, his voice steady despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. Our analysis suggests that a neutral zone administered by the Council could provide security for all parties while preserving the sovereignty of the indigenous populations. High Commander Zex's skin shifted to a deeper blue, a color Sarah had learned indicated dismissive contempt. The human perspective is noted for the record, he said, the universal translator somehow managing to convey the condescension in his tone. However, the realities of galactic security require more decisive action than the creation of additional bureaucratic barriers.
Queen Mindscrix's mandibles clicked rapidly as she interjected. The Kresh Collective finds merit in the Zeltharian assessment.
Indigenous populations represent inefficient resource utilization. Integration under established governance structures would optimize productivity across all affected systems. The Ethereals floated silently for several moments before responding in their characteristic chorus of overlapping voices. The pattern of expansion follows the ancient rhythm of growth and consumption. The smaller forms of consciousness must yield to the larger, as streams must yield to rivers, and rivers to the sea. Ambassador Wells tried again, consulting his notes as he spoke. With respect to the distinguished delegates, the Terran Federation believes that the rights of sentient beings should not be subordinated to economic or military concerns. The populations of the Kepler worlds have explicitly requested independence and self-governance. This time it was Queen Mindscrix who responded first. Human concepts of individual rights are an evolutionary inefficiency. The collective good supersedes personal preference. This is basic biology. Furthermore, High Commander Zexe added, his skin now a pale yellow that Sarah recognized as barely contained anger. Human military capabilities are insufficient to guarantee security in the contested regions. The Zeltharian Navy has proven its ability to maintain order and protect trade routes. Can the humans make the same claim? Commander Martinez's hand clenched into a fist where it rested on the table, but Ambassador Wells placed a calming hand on his arm. The Terran Defense Corps has maintained peace within our territories for over 2 centuries, Wells replied carefully. We believe that diplomatic solutions are preferable to military ones in most circumstances. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as High Commander Zex High leaned forward.
Most circumstances?
And what of the others, Ambassador? What happens when diplomacy fails? What happens when lesser species refuse to see reason? His skin had shifted to a deep red now, a color that meant he was actively considering violence. Sarah felt her own hands clench as she watched the exchange. She had seen this pattern play out countless times, the gradual escalation, the veiled threats, the systematic undermining of human authority. The other species didn't see humans as partners or even as worthy opponents. They saw them as obstacles to be circumvented or removed. Ambassador Wells straightened in his chair, his diplomat's training keeping his voice level even as the insult hit home. The Terran Federation believes that all sentient species deserve the opportunity to determine their own destiny. We stand ready to assist any peaceful resolution of conflicts, but we will not support aggressive expansion at the expense of innocent populations. The chamber fell silent except for the low humming of the Ethereal's containment suits and the distant throb of the ship's engines. Then High Commander Zexhai began to speak, his voice taking on the formal cadences of what Sarah recognized as a declaration of intent. The Zeltharian Empire has grown strong through decisive action and clear purpose. We have brought order to chaos, prosperity to backward worlds, and security to lawless sectors. The human reluctance to embrace necessary measures is a luxury that the galaxy can no longer afford. He stood, his 7-foot frame casting a long shadow across the conference table. The Kepler sector will be integrated into the Zeltharian Empire within the next Galactic Standard Month. Any interference with this process would be considered an act of aggression against a sovereign member of the Council. Queen Mindscrix's mandibles clicked in what humans had learned to recognize as approval. The Kresh Collective supports the Zeltharian position. Efficient resource allocation requires decisive leadership. The Ethereals remain silent, their forms shifting slightly within their containment suits. a sign that they were engaged in rapid internal debate. Finally, they spoke in unison. The Council observes the currents of change. The pattern moves toward confluence. Ambassador Wells looked around the table, his face pale but determined. The Terran Federation formally objects to this course of action. We request that this matter be submitted to full Council arbitration before any military action is undertaken. High Commander HFY's skin shifted through several colors before settling on a deep purple that Sarah had never seen before. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that made the universal translator crackle with static. The time for human objections has passed. Your species has contributed nothing to galactic security except delays and inefficient sentiment. You lack the strength to enforce your principles and the wisdom to recognize when you are outmatched. He moved closer to the human delegation, his massive frame looming over the seated ambassadors. The galaxy is entering a new era, one that requires strong leadership and clear vision. The Zeltharian Empire is prepared to provide both. Those who cannot adapt to this reality will be educated. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest as she watched High Commander HFY tower over her species' representatives. It wasn't fear or anger exactly, but something deeper and more fundamental. It was the recognition that 18 months of polite diplomatic discourse had been nothing more than an elaborate charade, a way for the major powers to maintain the illusion of cooperation while systematically marginalizing anyone who might object to their plans. Commander Martinez half rose from his chair, his hand moving instinctively toward where his sidearm would have been if weapons had been permitted in council chambers. Ambassador Wells grabbed his arm again, pulling him back down, but Sarah could see the cost of that restraint in the ambassador's white knuckles and trembling jaw. The Terran Federation will not abandon the principles upon which it was founded, Wells said quietly. If the Council chooses to ignore the rights of sovereign peoples, then we will find other ways to uphold them.
High Commander HFY's laugh was a sound like breaking crystal.
Other ways? What other ways could possibly exist for a species that refuses to fight for its beliefs? You speak of principles as if they were weapons, but principles cannot stop plasma cannons or shield generators. Principles cannot protect the innocent when stronger powers decide their fate. He turned to address the room at large, his voice taking on the resonant quality that marked formal declarations in Zeltharian culture. Let this session serve as notice to all present. The age of human influence in galactic affairs is ending. Those who wish to remain relevant must choose sides quickly, before the choice is made for them. The session ended abruptly as High Commander HFY and his delegation filed out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the sudden silence. The crash followed, their chittering growing fainter as they disappeared down the corridor. The ethereals lingered for a moment, their forms pulsing with what might have been curiosity or concern before they too drifted away. Sarah remained in her position against the wall, watching as Ambassador Wells slumped in his chair and Commander Martinez stared at the empty doorway where their opponents had just departed. She could hear the ambassador's quiet breathing, see the slight tremor in his hands as he gathered his scattered notes. "Sir," Commander Martinez said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Request permission to contact Terran Command. They need to know what just happened here." Wells nodded slowly, looking older than his 63 years. "Send the full transcript along with our assessment, mark it priority 1. He paused, running a hand through his silver hair. "And Martinez? Start preparing contingency plans. I think our diplomatic mission just became something else entirely." As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, Sarah followed at a respectful distance. She walked through the ship's corridors with new purpose, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just witnessed. For 18 months, she had been a silent observer, dutifully recording the slow dissolution of human influence in galactic politics. But now, something fundamental had changed. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had been silent, not out of weakness, but out of choice. And that choice was about to change. Sarah reached her quarters and immediately activated her secure communication console. As she began composing her report to Terran Defense Command, she found herself thinking not about diplomatic protocols or strategic assessments, but about something far simpler and more personal. She thought about her voice, and how long it had been since anyone had really listened to what she had to say. That was about to change too. 3 weeks after the disastrous council session, Sarah found herself aboard the military transport Defiant Dawn, watching Earth grow larger through the reinforced viewport of the passenger compartment. The blue marble of humanity's homeworld looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, its swirling clouds and gleaming oceans giving no hint of the frantic preparations taking place on every continent below. The emergency recall had come through encrypted channels just 72 hours after her detailed report reached Terran Defense Command. Every human diplomatic observer, military attaché, and intelligence operative scattered across the galaxy had received the same terse message: return to Earth immediately for reassignment. Sarah had packed her gear in under an hour, knowing that whatever was coming would be unlike anything she had experienced in her 8 years of service. The transport shuddered slightly as it entered Earth's atmosphere, the hull heating up as they descended toward the primary military spaceport in North America. Through the communications array, Sarah could hear fragments of traffic control chatter, launch schedules, cargo manifests, personnel transfers. The volume was staggering, suggesting a mobilization on a scale that humanity hadn't seen since the formation of the Terran Defense Corps. Commander Martinez sat across from her in the passenger compartment, his uniform still bearing the diplomatic insignia that would soon be replaced with something more practical. He had barely spoken during the 3-day journey from the council station, but Sarah could see the change in his posture, the way his hands kept moving to check equipment that wasn't there. He was transforming from diplomat back into soldier, and the process wasn't entirely comfortable. "Any word on our assignments?" Sarah asked as the transport began its final approach to the landing pad. Martinez looked up from the datapad he had been studying. "Nothing specific yet, but I've been reviewing the preliminary deployment schedules, and it looks like they're forming new tactical units. Mixed specialization teams with enhanced authority parameters." He paused, glancing around the passenger compartment to make sure they weren't being overheard. "Whatever they're planning, it's not another diplomatic mission." The transport touched down with a gentle thud, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of real gravity replacing the artificial fields of the ship. The passenger compartment depressurized with a soft hiss, and the exit ramp descended to reveal a bustling military complex that stretched to the horizon. Everywhere Sarah looked, she saw evidence of massive preparation. Supply convoys, personnel transports, engineering crews working around the clock to modify existing ships and construct new ones. A young lieutenant with the crisp bearing of a staff officer approached their group as they disembarked. "Lieutenant Chen?" he asked, consulting his datapad. "I'm Lieutenant Morrison, Operations Division. I'm here to escort you to your briefing." Sarah nodded and followed Morrison across the tarmac, her eyes taking in the controlled chaos around them. She counted at least 30 major vessels in various stages of preparation, from sleek frigates to massive carrier platforms that she had never seen before. The air hummed with energy and purpose, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The briefing facility was a stark contrast to the ornate chambers of the Galactic Council. Built from concrete and steel, it possessed a functional beauty that spoke of serious purpose rather than ceremonial display. Morrison led Sarah through a security checkpoint that scanned everything from her biometrics to her recent dietary habits. Then through a maze of corridors that seemed designed to disorient potential intruders. "The General will see you in Conference Room 7, Morrison said, stopping before a plain metal door marked only with a number. "She's been reviewing your report extensively, so be prepared for detailed questions." Sarah straightened her uniform and knocked twice on the door. A voice from inside called for her to enter, and she found herself facing a woman who seemed to embody everything that humanity could become when pushed to its limits. General Victoria Kane stood behind a massive holographic display showing star charts and tactical assessments from across the galaxy. She was tall without being imposing, her graying hair pulled back in a practical style that suggested she had more important concerns than appearance. Her uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Strategic Command, a division that Sarah had heard rumors about but never encountered directly. "Lieutenant Chen," General Kane said, looking up from her displays. "Your report from the council session has been quite illuminating. Please, have a seat." Sarah settled into one of the chairs arranged around the conference table, noting that the room's displays showed real-time intelligence feeds from dozens of star systems. Most of the data seemed to focus on Zeltharian and Kresh military movements, tracking fleet positions and deployment patterns with obsessive detail. "I've been wondering," General Kane continued, moving around the table to sit across from Sarah, "what it must have been like to sit in that room and watch our species being systematically dismissed and marginalized. 18 months of observation reports, all documenting the same pattern of exclusion and contempt." Sarah chose her words carefully. "It was educational, General. I learnt a great deal about how the major powers view humanity's role in galactic affairs. And what role is that, in your assessment?" "None whatsoever, General. They see us as irrelevant at best and inconvenient at worst. Our diplomatic approach has been interpreted as weakness, and our reluctance to use force has been taken as evidence that we're not serious about protecting our interests." General Kane nodded slowly, her fingers drumming against the table surface. The Council powers operate on a very simple principle. Might makes right. They've grown comfortable with the idea that strength is the only currency that matters in galactic politics. What they haven't considered is the possibility that we've been deliberately underestimating our own capabilities. She activated a control on the table, and the room's display shifted to show detailed technical specifications for ships and weapons that Sarah had never seen before. For the past 50 years, while we've been playing the role of peaceful diplomats, our research and development teams have been working on some very interesting projects. The other species assume that human technology is limited to what we've shown them in our diplomatic vessels and civilian transports. Sarah studied the displays, her tactical training helping her interpret the technical data. What she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. The weapon systems alone represented a quantum leap beyond anything in the current human fleet, and the ship design suggested capabilities that would revolutionize space warfare. This is incredible, General. How long have these projects been in development? Since the day we first encountered the Zeltharian Empire and realized that peaceful coexistence might not be possible indefinitely. General Kane stood and moved to a display showing deployment schedules. We've been preparing for this moment for decades, Lieutenant. The question now is whether we're ready to use what we've built. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the implications became clear. The Council thinks they're dealing with a minor power that can be easily intimidated or eliminated. They have no idea what we're actually capable of.
Exactly. And that gives us a significant tactical advantage, at least initially.
General Kane turned back to face Sarah directly. Which brings me to your new assignment. Based on your observation reports and your tactical background, you've been selected for a special operations unit that will be operating behind enemy lines. The General activated another display, this one showing a star chart of the Kepler sector, the same region that High Commander Zex High had threatened to absorb into the Zeltharian Empire. The indigenous populations in this sector have been requesting assistance in resisting Zeltharian expansion. Officially, the Terran Federation cannot provide military support without violating Council neutrality agreements. Sarah began to understand where this was heading. But unofficially? Unofficially, a group of human volunteers with extensive combat experience and advanced equipment might decide to take a vacation in the Kepler sector. What they choose to do during their time off would be entirely their own decision. General Kane's smile was sharp as a blade. Your team will consist of 12 specialists, each with unique skills relevant to asymmetric warfare. Your mission parameters will be deliberately vague, giving you maximum flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. Your equipment will be the most advanced technology that humanity has ever produced. She paused, studying Sarah's expression carefully. And your commanding officer will be someone with extensive experience in making impossible decisions under extreme pressure. Someone who understands that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names never appear in the history books. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, the same sensation she had experienced during the council session, but stronger now. You want me to lead this team? I want you to do whatever is necessary to protect innocent people and demonstrate that humanity will not be intimidated or sidelined. The details of how you accomplish that are entirely up to your judgment. General Kane moved to a wall-mounted safe and withdrew a sealed data packet marked with security classifications that Sarah had never seen before. Your team roster, equipment specifications, and initial insertion plan are all in here. You have 48 hours to review the materials and inform me of your decision. Sarah took the packet, feeling the weight of it in her hands. What about rules of engagement, General? What limitations do we have? The only limitation is that you cannot take any action that could definitively be traced back to the Terran Federation. Beyond that, you are authorized to use your best judgment in protecting civilian populations and disrupting hostile military operations. General Kane's expression grew serious. But Lieutenant, understand what you're accepting here. Once you begin this mission, you'll be operating entirely on your own. No backup, no official support, no extraction if things go wrong. Sarah thought about the council session. About High Commander Zex High's dismissive contempt and the casual way he had threatened entire populations. She thought about 18 months of watching humanity being systematically marginalized while more aggressive species carved up the galaxy according to their own interests. I understand, General. And I accept. Good. Report to the Special Operations Facility at 0600 tomorrow for team introductions and equipment familiarization.
Your insertion window opens in 72 hours.
As Sarah left the briefing room, her mind was already racing through the tactical possibilities suggested by the classified materials in her packet. The corridors of the military complex seemed different now, charged with purpose and potential. For the first time in 18 months, she felt like she was moving towards something meaningful rather than simply observing the slow dissolution of human influence. That evening, alone in her temporary quarters, Sarah spread the contents of the data packet across her desk and began to study her new reality. The team roster showed 11 other specialists with backgrounds ranging from demolitions to xenobiology to psychological warfare. Their equipment list read like something from a science fiction novel: stealth technology that could fool advanced sensors, weapons that could punch through ship hulls, communication systems that could operate across galactic distances without detection. But it was the mission profile that really captured her attention. The indigenous populations of the Kepler sector weren't just facing absorption into the Zeltharian Empire. They were facing cultural extinction. The Zeltharians had a documented history of systematically eliminating local traditions, languages, and belief systems in favor of their own standardized imperial culture. Within a generation, the unique civilizations that had developed on those worlds would cease to exist. Sarah found herself thinking about her own culture, about the traditions and values that made humanity distinct from the other galactic powers. The Zeltharians saw strength only in conquest and dominance. The Kresh reduced everything to resource calculations and efficiency metrics. The Ethereals viewed individual consciousness as an evolutionary aberration that would eventually be absorbed into collective awareness. But humans valued something that none of the other species seemed to understand: the idea that diversity of thought and culture was not a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be protected and celebrated. It was a principle that they had been reluctant to fight for. But perhaps that reluctance had been mistaken for inability. Sarah closed the files and began preparing her gear for the morning briefing. Tomorrow, she would meet the team that would help her prove that humanity's voice in galactic affairs was far from silent. It had simply been choosing its moment to speak. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah found herself anticipating something she hadn't felt in months: the chance to make a real difference. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had been underestimated for far too long, and that discovery was going to change everything. The next morning arrived grey and cold, with a persistent drizzle that seemed to emphasize the seriousness of what was about to begin. Sarah made her way to the Special Operations Facility through corridors that hummed with activity, passing technicians and engineers who moved with the focused intensity of people working against an impossible deadline. The facility itself was buried 3 levels underground, accessible only through security checkpoints that scanned everything from DNA patterns to psychological profiles. Sarah had never seen anything like it in 8 years of military service. The kind of installation that existed in rumors and classified briefings, but never in direct experience. Lieutenant Morrison met her at the final checkpoint, his expression more serious than it had been during their previous encounter. "The General is waiting for you in Lab 7, he said, leading her through corridors lined with displays showing tactical simulations and equipment tests. "The rest of your team arrived earlier this morning." Sarah followed Morrison through a maze of chambers filled with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything she had seen before. Engineers worked with devices that defied easy categorization, their purposes obscured by complexity and advanced design. The air itself seemed charged with potential energy, as if the very walls contained power sources beyond conventional understanding. Lab 7 turned out to be a massive chamber, containing what could only be described as a complete mission simulation environment. The walls displayed real-time holographic representations of star systems, while workstations around the room showed detailed intelligence feeds from across the galaxy. At the center of it all stood 11 individuals who would soon become her responsibility. Sarah's first impression was that the team had been selected for competence rather than compatibility. They ranged in age from mid-20s to early 50s, representing a mix of specializations that suggested preparation for every conceivable contingency. As she introduced herself to each team member, Sarah began to understand the scope of what they were being asked to accomplish. Sergeant Marcus Reed, Demolitions and Heavy Weapons Specialist, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had solved problems by applying precisely the right amount of explosive force. His equipment list included devices that could level city blocks or disable starships with surgical precision. Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiology and medical officer, possessed knowledge of alien physiology that could prove crucial when dealing with non-human populations. Her background included field experience in some of the galaxy's most hostile environments, treating injuries that conventional medicine couldn't even classify. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, communications and electronic warfare specialist, could apparently intercept and decrypt transmissions from any known alien technology. His gear included quantum communication arrays that operated on principles Sarah didn't entirely understand. Each team member represented years of training and preparation for missions that officially didn't exist. As Sarah worked through introductions and initial briefings, She began to realize that this operation had been planned for far longer than the recent Council crisis. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since their first contact with hostile alien powers, building capabilities in secret while maintaining a facade of diplomatic weakness. The final member of the team introduced himself simply as Control, a designation rather than a name, suggesting connections to intelligence networks that operated beyond normal military channels. His role seemed to involve maintaining communication with assets and information sources scattered across the galaxy, providing real-time intelligence that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Sarah found herself immersed in technical briefings that revealed the true extent of human technical advancement. The stealth systems they would be using represented quantum leaps beyond anything the other galactic powers possessed. Their weapons incorporated principles that could disable alien defenses designed to counter known human capabilities. Most importantly, their mission parameters included authorization to recruit local assets and train indigenous populations in advanced resistance techniques. They weren't just being sent to disrupt Zeltharian operations. They were being given the tools to organize a galaxy-wide resistance movement. By evening, Sarah understood that she had been selected not just for her tactical skills or her diplomatic experience, but for her ability to see the larger pattern behind individual events. The Kepler sector operation was intended as proof of concept for something much larger, a demonstration that humanity could project power across galactic distances while maintaining plausible deniability. As her team prepared for their final equipment checks and departure briefings, Sarah realized that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something unprecedented in human history. For the first time, they would be taking the initiative rather than simply reacting to events shaped by other species. The galaxy was about to hear humanity's voice, and that voice was going to carry farther than anyone expected. The insertion went flawlessly, which immediately made Sarah suspicious. Their ship, disguised as a civilian transport carrying mining equipment to the Outer Rim territories, had passed through 3 separate Zeltharian checkpoints without raising any alarms. The stealth modifications worked exactly as promised, rendering their vessel effectively invisible to standard sensor arrays while maintaining the energy signature of a legitimate commercial operation. But as Sarah watched the jungle canopy of Kepler 442b rushing past their position through the cockpit's forward viewport, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. Successful infiltrations usually resulted from careful planning and superior technology, but they rarely felt this easy. "Landing zone in sight," announced Lieutenant Morrison from the pilot's seat. His voice filtered through the communication system that would keep them in contact with each other and with Control's intelligence network. "Touchdown in 3 minutes." Sarah checked her equipment one final time, running through the mental checklist that had become second nature during their preparation phase. The rifle slung across her back represented technology that was years ahead of anything the Zeltharian military possessed, while her armor incorporated defensive systems that could stop projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. More importantly, her communication array would allow her to coordinate with resistance cells across multiple star systems simultaneously. The transport touched down in a clearing that had been prepared by local contacts, its landing barely disturbing the alien vegetation that surrounded their position. Through the viewports, Sarah could see movement in the tree line, their local guides emerging from concealment after confirming that the landing had proceeded according to plan. "Remember," Sarah said, addressing her team through their secure communication channel, "we're advisors, not conquerors. Our job is to help these people protect themselves, not to fight their battles for them." She paused, checking that all team members were receiving her transmission clearly. "But if the situation escalates beyond advisory support, we have authorization to take whatever action we deem necessary." The team disembarked in standard formation, with Sergeant Reed and Dr. Vasquez providing perimeter security while Morrison and Control established their communication links with off-world assets. Sarah approached the tree line where their contacts were waiting, her translator already analyzing the local language patterns and preparing to facilitate communication. The Keplerian delegation consisted of 5 individuals representing different aspects of their resistance organization. Their leader introduced herself as Zara Moonheart, a name that the translator rendered as approximately equivalent to Guardian of Sacred Traditions. She stood nearly as tall as a human, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted between deep green and golden brown depending on her emotional state. Her people had evolved in the dense forests of their world, developing natural camouflage abilities that made them nearly impossible to detect when they chose to remain hidden. "We have been waiting for allies who would treat us as equals rather than resources to be managed," Zara said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested complex emotional undertones. The Zeltharians speak of integration and progress, but we have seen what happens to cultures that accept their protection. Sarah nodded, consulting the intelligence briefings the Control had prepared for this moment. We understand that you've been monitoring Zeltharian expansion into neighboring systems. What have you observed about their methods? Zara's skin shifted to a darker green, a color that Sarah's briefings had identified as indicating anger or distress. They begin with infrastructure projects, roads, communication networks, resource extraction facilities. They claim these developments will benefit our people, but they serve only to make our world more useful to the Empire. She gestured toward the forest around them, her movements flowing with the natural grace that marked her species. Our traditions are bound to this land, to the rhythms of growth and renewal that have sustained us for thousands of years. The Zeltharians see only timber resources and mineral deposits. They cannot comprehend that our civilization exists in harmony with our environment rather than in spite of it. Sarah felt something resonate inside her chest as she listened to Zara's description of the Zeltharian approach. It was the same pattern she had observed during the council sessions, the systematic reduction of complex cultural relationships to simple resource calculations.
The Empire couldn't understand societies that valued things other than power and efficiency.
Show us, Sarah said simply. Show us how they're changing your world, and we'll help you develop strategies to resist those changes. Over the following days, Zara and her team guided the humans through a comprehensive tour of the Zeltharian occupation infrastructure. What they found was both more subtle and more devastating than Sarah had expected from the intelligence briefings. The Zeltharians hadn't simply invaded and conquered. They had implemented a carefully designed program of cultural transformation that appeared benevolent on the surface, while systematically undermining the foundations of Keplerian society. New transportation networks bypassed traditional gathering places, isolating communities from each other. Communication systems provided access to Zeltharian entertainment and education, while making local cultural content seem primitive by comparison. Most insidiously, the Empire had begun recruiting young Keplerians for advanced education opportunities that took them off-world for years at a time. Those who returned came back changed, speaking of efficiency and progress while showing subtle signs of psychological conditioning that made them natural advocates for further integration with imperial systems.
We lose our children one at a time, Zara explained as they observed a group of adolescent Keplerians boarding a transport bound for a Zeltharian education facility.
They returned speaking our language but thinking their thoughts. Within a generation, our resistance will collapse from within. Sarah watched the transport disappear into the clouds, feeling the familiar anger that had sustained her through 18 months of diplomatic humiliation. But this time, the anger was accompanied by something else, a sense of purpose that came from finally being able to take meaningful action. Sergeant Reed, she said, activating her communication array. I need you to conduct a detailed analysis of their transportation infrastructure. Look for critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited without causing excessive civilian casualties. Dr. Vasquez, she continued, work with Zara's medical team to develop countermeasures for whatever psychological conditioning protocols the Empire is using on those education program participants. Morrison, control. I want complete surveillance coverage of their communication networks. We need to understand how they're coordinating these cultural transformation programs across multiple worlds. As her team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Sarah found herself walking alone with Zara through a section of forest that had been marked for clearing to make room for a new Zeltharian administrative complex. Ancient trees that had stood for centuries were tagged with symbols indicating their scheduled destruction, while survey stakes marked the locations of buildings that would house the bureaucrats who would manage the systematic elimination of Keplerian culture. Your people must have faced similar challenges, Zara said, her skin shifting to colors that suggested curiosity mixed with concern. How did humanity resist absorption into larger imperial structures? Sarah considered the question carefully, thinking about Earth's history of colonization and resistance, of cultures that had survived by adapting, while others had disappeared entirely. We learned that sometimes you have to fight for the right to exist as yourself rather than as what others want you to become. But fighting requires strength, and strength requires unity. The Zeltharians are very good at preventing their subjects from organizing effective resistance.
Then we'll have to teach you methods they haven't encountered before,
Sarah replied, feeling the weight of her team's advanced equipment and the capabilities it represented. And we'll help you coordinate with resistance groups on other worlds so that your actions support each other rather than being isolated incidents. That evening, as Sarah's team established their first operational base in a cave system that had been prepared by the local resistance, She received a priority communication from Control that changed everything about their mission parameters. Lieutenant, Control's voice came through her private communication channel. We're receiving intelligence reports from assets throughout the sector. The Zeltharian response to resistance activities has been much more aggressive than our projections suggested. Sarah activated her secure display and reviewed the incoming data streams. What she saw there made her understand why their insertion had been so easy. The Empire wasn't particularly concerned about small-scale resistance because they had been planning something much more comprehensive than simple cultural absorption. They're not just integrating these worlds, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. They're preparing them for complete ecological transformation, industrial-scale resource extraction, atmospheric modification, genetic engineering of the local populations to better suit imperial needs. Confirmed, Control replied. And the timeline has been accelerated. Intelligence suggests they're planning to begin the full transformation process within the next 6 months. Sarah felt something snap into place inside her mind, a clarity of purpose that cut through all the diplomatic complexity and cultural considerations to focus on a simple, fundamental truth. The Zeltharian Empire wasn't just threatening to change these worlds. They were planning to destroy them and rebuild them according to their own specifications. Within a generation, not only would Kepleran culture cease to exist, but the Keplerans themselves would be transformed into something unrecognizable. Control, she said, her voice carrying a new edge that surprised even her. I need you to establish contact with every resistance cell in the sector. Tell them that the advisory mission parameters have changed. Changed how, Lieutenant? Sarah looked out from the cave entrance at the forest that surrounded their position, thinking about ancient trees marked for destruction and children being systematically conditioned to reject their own heritage. She thought about 18 months of watching humanity being dismissed and marginalized, while more aggressive species planned the systematic destruction of smaller civilizations. We're not just advisors anymore, she said. We're going to war. The next morning, Sarah assembled her team and their Keplerian allies for a briefing that would establish new operational parameters for everything that followed. The cave system had been expanded overnight with the help of Sergeant Reed's specialized equipment, creating a command center that could coordinate resistance activities across multiple star systems simultaneously. The situation has changed, Sarah began, addressing both her human team members and the assembled Keplerian resistance leaders. Intelligence indicates that the Zeltharian Empire isn't planning gradual cultural integration. They're preparing for complete planetary transformation on a scale that will eliminate all existing ecosystems and populations within the next several years. The translation of her words into the Keplerian language created a susurrus of horrified whispers throughout the cave. Zara's skin shifted through several color combinations that Sarah had learned to associate with extreme distress before settling on a pale golden hue that indicated shocked determination.
What you're describing, Zara said carefully, would be the complete destruction of everything our people have been for thousands of years.
Not just our culture, but our physical existence as a species. That's exactly what I'm describing, Sarah replied. And it's what the Empire has been planning all along. The infrastructure projects, the education programs, the cultural integration initiatives, they've all been preparation for industrial-scale transformation that will remake these worlds according to Zeltharian specifications. She activated the holographic display system that her team had installed, showing detailed projections of the Empire's planned modifications to the sector. Atmospheric processes that would change the composition of planetary environments. Genetic modification facilities that would adapt surviving populations to serve imperial needs. Resource extraction operations that would strip entire worlds down to their core materials. However, Sarah continued, this intelligence also represents an opportunity. The Empire's plans require massive infrastructure investments and careful coordination across multiple worlds. If we can disrupt those preparations and organize effective resistance across the entire sector, we can force them to reconsider the viability of their transformation timeline. Sergeant Reed leaned forward, studying the tactical displays with professional interest. Lieutenant, the scale of infrastructure they're describing represents thousands of potential targets. If we coordinate simultaneous strikes across multiple worlds, we could create the kind of systematic disruption that would make their timeline impossible to maintain. Dr. Vasquez nodded agreement. And if we can reverse the psychological conditioning of the education program participants, we'll have thousands of potential allies who understand imperial systems from the inside. Morrison looked up from his communication arrays. Control confirms that we have contact with resistance cells on 17 different worlds throughout the sector. They're all reporting similar infrastructure development and population conditioning programs. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of pieces clicking into place, but this time it was accompanied by something she had never experienced before, The absolute certainty that she was about to undertake something that would fundamentally change the balance of power in galactic politics. Then we're going to give the galaxy its first demonstration of coordinated human strategic thinking, she said. The Empire has been operating under the assumption that resistance movements are isolated, reactive, and fundamentally defensive. They're about to discover that humans approach asymmetric warfare very differently. She turned to address Zara and the other Keplerian leaders. Your people have been hiding in forests and conducting small-scale sabotage because you've been thinking like prey trying to avoid predators. We're going to teach you to think like apex predators who have been waiting for the right moment to hunt. Zara's skin shifted to a deep blue color that Sarah hadn't seen before, something that seemed to indicate a combination of fear and excitement. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 18 months, it felt like a genuine expression of confidence rather than diplomatic politeness. We're going to demonstrate that humans have been underestimated for far too long, and we're going to do it in a way that the entire galaxy will notice. The briefing continued late into the evening as Sarah's team outlined training programs and coordination strategies that would transform scattered resistance cells into a unified military force capable of challenging imperial operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. By the time they finished, Sarah realized that they had moved far beyond their original mission parameters into something unprecedented in human history. They were about to prove that humanity's reluctance to use force had been mistaken for inability rather than choice. And once that demonstration began, there would be no going back to the diplomatic marginalization that had characterized human participation in galactic politics. The universe was about to hear humanity's voice, and it was going to be louder than anyone expected. The first coordinated strike took place at 0400 Galactic Standard Time across 17 different worlds simultaneously, and by 0430 GST, the Zelfarian Empire realized they were facing something they had never encountered before. Sarah crouched in the pre-dawn darkness beside a massive atmospheric processor that had been destined to begin operation within the next month, watching her team apply Sergeant Reed's specialized charges to critical structural points. The facility stretched for kilometers across what had once been a sacred grove, its towering spires and industrial complexes representing the Empire's intention to remake this world according to their own specifications. Charges set, Reed reported through their secure communication network. Synchronized detonation in 30 seconds. Through her enhanced display, Sarah could see similar confirmations arriving from resistance cells across the sector.
Morrison's communication arrays showed green indicators for operations on 14 worlds, with 3 more reporting slight delays due to unexpected security measures.
Control's intelligence network had coordinated the timing to ensure maximum psychological impact. 17 worlds all demonstrating organized resistance at the exact same moment. All units, Sarah said, her voice carrying across multiple star systems through quantum communication relays that the Empire couldn't intercept or decode. Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. The atmospheric processor erupted in a chain of precisely controlled explosions that sent pillars of fire reaching toward the night sky. The charges had been placed to create maximum structural damage while avoiding the residential areas where Keplerian families had been relocated to make room for imperial infrastructure. Within minutes, a facility that had taken 2 years to construct was reduced to twisted metal and shattered components that would take at least another year to replace. But the destruction of individual facilities was only part of the message. As Sarah led her team through evacuation routes that had been prepared weeks in advance, Morrison's displays showed confirmation signals arriving from across the sector. Genetic modification laboratories on Kepler 286C, resource extraction operations on Kepler 438b, communication relays on Kepler 442c, transportation hubs on Kepler 1649b. The resistance had evolved from isolated harassment to coordinated strategic warfare in the space of a single operation. Control, Sarah said as they reached their fallback position in the forest canopy. Confirm mission status across all target zones. Confirm successful strikes on all 17 primary targets. Control's voice crackled through the secure channel. Secondary objectives achieved on 12 of 17 worlds. No reported casualties among resistance personnel. Minimal collateral damage to civilian infrastructure. Sarah felt something that might have been pride settling in her chest as the implications became clear. They had just demonstrated that seemingly primitive resistance movements could coordinate sophisticated military operations across galactic distances with precision that rival established military forces. More importantly, They had done it without causing the civilian casualties that the Empire routinely inflicted during their integration operations. Zara, Sarah called, switching to the local communication frequency that connected her to the Keplerian resistance leaders. How are your people handling the aftermath?
Zara's response carried undertones of amazement that the translator rendered as barely controlled excitement.
Our youth are returning from the forests with reports of imperial facilities burning throughout the night. For the first time in 3 years, our people believe that resistance might actually be possible. But Sarah knew that the real test would come in the Empire's response to this unprecedented challenge to their authority. The Zeltharians had built their expansion strategy on the assumption that resistance would remain localized and reactive, allowing them to address each problem individually while maintaining overall momentum toward their transformation objectives. Coordinated resistance across multiple star systems represented a fundamental threat to that strategy, and Sarah expected their response to be swift and decisive. She didn't have to wait long. At 0800 GST, Morrison's communication arrays detected massive fleet movements throughout Imperial space. Battle groups that had been assigned to garrison duties were being recalled and consolidated into strike forces with enough firepower to devastate entire worlds. The Empire wasn't just planning to crush the resistance, they were preparing to make examples that would prevent future uprisings. Lieutenant. Control's voice carried an edge of concern that Sarah had never heard before. Imperial fleet movements suggest they're planning immediate retaliation against resistance strongholds. Our intelligence indicates they've identified 7 worlds as primary coordination centers for the sector-wide operations. Sarah consulted her tactical displays, cross-referencing Imperial fleet positions with resistance infrastructure throughout the sector. What she saw there confirmed her worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. The Empire was committing forces on a scale that would allow them to eliminate organized resistance within days, but they were also exposing their fleet elements to coordinated attack in a way that had never happened before. All resistance cells, she said, switching to the sector-wide communication frequency. Imperial retaliation fleets are en route to your positions. Evacuation protocols are now in effect. Move your people to the secondary positions we established during training. She paused, watching the tactical displays as Imperial battle groups continued to deploy throughout the sector. But before you withdraw, I want you to remember what we accomplished today. We proved that the Empire can be challenged. We proved that coordination across multiple worlds is possible. And we proved that resistance can inflict real damage on their strategic objectives. Now we're going to prove something else, Sarah continued, feeling a certainty settle into her voice that she had never experienced before. We're going to prove that their retaliation will cost them more than our initial strikes cost us. Over the next several hours, Sarah's team implemented contingency plans that had been developed during their training phase but never tested under actual combat conditions. The Keplerian resistance networks disappeared into prepared hiding positions throughout the forest canopy, taking with them weapons and communication equipment that would allow them to continue operations even under direct Imperial occupation. But the humans took a different approach entirely. Sergeant Reed, Sarah said as they prepared their equipment for the next phase of operations. How long would it take you to modify our remaining charges for anti-ship operations? Reed consulted his technical manuals, his expression shifting from uncertainty to professional interest. If we're talking about disabling rather than destroying, maybe 6 hours for a complete reconfiguration. But, Lieutenant, anti-ship operations would require us to get much closer to Imperial fleet elements than our current stealth capabilities can guarantee. Sarah nodded, studying the fleet disposition reports that Control was providing in real time. Morrison, what's our communication range for coordinating with off-world assets? Unlimited range through quantum relay, but response time increases with distance. We can maintain real-time coordination with resistance cells throughout the sector, but communication with Earth would involve significant delays. Sarah felt pieces clicking into place in her mind as she contemplated options that would have been impossible to consider under normal diplomatic constraints. The Empire expected resistance movements to retreat in the face of superior force, to hide and hope that retaliation would eventually pass. They weren't prepared for opponents who would escalate rather than withdraw when threatened. Dr. Vasquez, she continued, what's our medical capability for treating combat injuries under field conditions? Full surgical capability for humans. Basic trauma care for Keplerian physiology. Why? Are you planning something that's going to result in casualties? Sarah looked around at her team, seeing the same understanding beginning to dawn in their expressions that she was feeling in her own mind. They had been sent as advisors with authorization to provide defensive support to resistance operations. But the Empire's planned retaliation represented a threat to civilian populations on a scale that exceeded their original mission parameters. I'm planning something that's going to result in the Empire discovering that humans have capabilities they haven't taken into account, she said. Control, I need a priority communication link with Terran Strategic Command. The communication took 47 minutes to establish through quantum relay networks that had been designed for exactly this kind of emergency contact. When General Kane's voice finally came through the secure channel, it carried undertones of concern mixed with anticipation. Lieutenant Chen, the general said without preamble. We've been monitoring your sector-wide operations with considerable interest. The coordination and precision of your strikes have exceeded our most optimistic projections for resistance effectiveness. Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty as she realized that her next words would commit her team to a course of action that went far beyond their original authorization. General, Imperial retaliation fleets are moving to crush the resistance movements we've trained. Their force disposition indicates they're planning to make examples that will prevent future uprisings. We're prepared for that possibility, Lieutenant. Your mission parameters include provisions for withdrawal and regrouping under exactly these circumstances. With respect, General, I'm not requesting withdrawal authorization. I'm requesting permission to engage Imperial fleet elements directly. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds before General Kane responded. Lieutenant, direct engagement with Imperial military forces would represent an escalation that could trigger sector-wide conflict. Are you certain that's the appropriate response to the current situation? Sarah looked out through the forest canopy at smoke still rising from the destroyed atmospheric processor, thinking about genetic modification facilities that would transform entire populations and educational programs that stole children's identity one mind at a time. She thought about 18 months of diplomatic humiliation and systematic marginalization, about High Commander Zexhi's casual dismissal of human objections to genocide. General, the Empire isn't planning to suppress resistance movements. They're planning to eliminate the populations that might resist in the future. Our intelligence indicates that their retaliation will include genetic modification weapons designed to make the survivors more compliant with Imperial authority. If that's accurate, Lieutenant, then your mission parameters do include authorization for whatever action you deem necessary to protect civilian populations. Sarah felt something settle into place inside her chest, a sense of purpose and authority that went beyond military rank or organizational hierarchy. Then, I'm informing you that we're going to demonstrate human strategic capabilities to the Empire in a way that will force them to reconsider their approach to this sector. Understood, Lieutenant. What do you need from us? Intelligence support and confirmation that additional assets are available if the situation escalates beyond our current capabilities.
You have both, General Kane replied immediately. And, Lieutenant?
The entire galaxy is going to be watching what happens next. Make sure they see something that changes their assumptions about human military capabilities. After the communication ended, Sarah assembled her team for a briefing that would establish new operational parameters for everything that followed. The cave system had been expanded again with the help of Keplerian engineers, creating a command center that could coordinate military operations across multiple star systems while maintaining communication with Earth's strategic command network. The mission has evolved, she began, addressing both her human team members and the assembled resistance leaders. Imperial retaliation forces are planning to use genetic modification weapons against civilian populations. Our authorization now includes direct engagement with Imperial military assets. Zara's skin shifted through several color combinations before settling on a pale gold that indicated shocked hope. You're proposing to attack Imperial warships with a team of 12 specialists? I'm proposing to demonstrate that human military technology has capabilities that the Empire hasn't taken into account, Sarah replied. And I'm proposing to coordinate those demonstrations with continued resistance operations in a way that will force them to choose between escalating to full-scale war or reconsidering their expansion plans. Sergeant Reed leaned forward, his expression showing professional interest rather than concern. Lieutenant, attacking Imperial fleet elements would require us to operate in open space rather than using terrestrial cover. Are we equipped for that kind of engagement?
Sarah activated displays showing technical specifications for equipment that had been included in their mission loadout but never fully explained.
Personal spacecraft that incorporated stealth technology years ahead of anything the Empire possessed. Weapons that could disable starship systems from distances measured in light minutes rather than kilometers. Dr. Vasquez, she continued, your medical training includes treatment protocols for zero-gravity combat injuries, correct? Among other things, Vasquez replied, studying the equipment specifications with growing understanding. But Lieutenant, if we're planning direct engagement with Imperial fleet elements, shouldn't we coordinate with the Terran Navy? The Terran Navy doesn't officially exist in this sector, Sarah said. But individual human specialists on vacation might choose to take action to protect civilian populations from war crimes. Morrison looked up from his communication arrays with an expression of dawning comprehension. Lieutenant, are you planning to make the Empire think they're facing an organized human military operation while maintaining plausible deniability for the Terran Federation? Sarah smiled, feeling the same certainty that had carried her through the successful coordination of the morning's strikes. I'm planning to demonstrate that humans have been underestimated for far too long, and that underestimation is about to become very expensive for the Empire. She turned to address the assembled Keplerian leaders. Your resistance networks will continue operations according to the plans we established during training. But now those operations will be coordinated with direct strikes against Imperial fleet elements that will force them to divide their attention between suppressing resistance and defending their own assets. Zara's skin shifted to deep blue again, the color that seemed to indicate a combination of fear and excitement. What you're describing, it would be the first time in Imperial history that an expansion operation faced organized military resistance rather than just planetary uprisings.
Exactly, Sarah replied.
And it's going to change their assumptions about the cost of expansion in sectors where humans have interests. As evening approached and the team prepared for operations that would take them into open space for the first time since their arrival, Sarah realized that she was about to cross a threshold that would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the galactic community. For centuries, humans had sought acceptance and inclusion through diplomatic means, demonstrating their worthiness through cooperation and restraint. Tomorrow, they would demonstrate their worthiness through capabilities that no other species had imagined they possessed. The Empire was about to discover that humanity's silence had been a choice, not a weakness. And once that discovery was made, there would be no going back to the marginalization and dismissal that had characterized human participation in galactic politics. Sarah looked out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, knowing that somewhere among them, Imperial fleet commanders were making final preparations for retaliation operations that they assumed would face only primitive resistance. They had no idea that they were about to encounter something unprecedented in their military experience. The universe was about to hear humanity's war cry, and it was going to echo across every star system in the galaxy. The Imperial battleship Sovereign Glory was a monument to Zeltharian military engineering. 2 kilometers of crystalline armor and quantum weaponry that had never faced serious opposition in 3 decades of expansion operations. High Commander Zexhay stood on its command bridge, watching tactical displays that showed his fleet in perfect formation, prepared to deliver retribution against the resistance cells that had dared to challenge Imperial authority. He had no way of knowing that Sarah Chen was watching him from a distance of 50,000 kilometers, her stealth-equipped assault craft invisible to every sensor system the Empire had ever developed. Target acquired, Sarah said into her communication array, her voice carrying across quantum relays to coordinate strikes that would take place simultaneously throughout the sector. All units confirm ready status. The responses came back in a steady stream from assault teams positioned around every major Imperial vessel in the fleet. Sergeant Reed's voice was calm as he reported from his position near the fleet's primary support carrier. Morrison confirmed ready status from his approach vector toward the command and communication ship. Vasquez had positioned herself near the medical transport that would be needed to treat casualties from the Empire's planned genetic modification attacks. But it was Control's report that carried the most significant implications for what was about to unfold. Lieutenant, I'm receiving confirmation signals from human assets throughout the galaxy. The Terran Strategic Command has been coordinating similar operations in 16 other sectors. When you begin your attack, you'll be triggering the largest coordinated military action in human history. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest as the full scope of what was happening became clear. This wasn't just about protecting the Kepler sector from Imperial expansion. It was about demonstrating to every major power in the galaxy that humanity was no longer willing to accept marginalization and dismissal. Today would mark the end of human diplomatic weakness and the beginning of something entirely new. All units, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. Execute in 30 seconds. Target priority is disabling rather than destruction. We want them alive to report what happened here. The assault craft that had carried her team to their target positions represented technology that was decades ahead of anything the other galactic powers possessed. Propulsion systems that operated on principles the Empire couldn't detect. Weapons that could punch through crystalline armor as if it were paper. Most importantly, stealth capabilities that would allow them to strike without ever being seen or identified. 15 seconds, Sarah continued, watching the tactical display as Imperial fleet elements continued their approach toward the worlds where resistance operations had taken place. The Zeltharian commanders had no idea that their own ships had become targets, that the primitive resistance they expected to crush was about to demonstrate capabilities that would revolutionize galactic warfare. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute. Sarah's assault craft emerged from stealth directly above the Sovereign Glory's command section, weapons already locked onto critical system nodes that had been identified through months of intelligence preparation. The directed energy beam that lanced out from her ship lasted for less than 3 seconds, but when it ended, the Imperial flagship's primary command systems had been reduced to fused metal and crystalline fragments. Across the fleet, similar strikes disabled communication arrays, weapon control centers, and propulsion systems with surgical precision. Within 30 seconds of Sarah's first shot, the most powerful Zeltharian battle group ever assembled had been rendered effectively helpless by opponents they couldn't see or track. But the psychological impact was even more significant than the tactical damage. High Commander Zexai's command bridge erupted in chaos as his officers tried to understand how their most advanced warship had been disabled by weapons that their sensors couldn't detect. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across display screens that showed nothing but static, while the subsonic vibrations that indicated massive structural damage resonated through the ship's hull. "Status report," Zexai demanded, his skin shifting through color combinations that indicated rage mixed with bewilderment. "What happened to our defensive systems?" "Unknown, High Commander," his tactical officer replied, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonics of barely controlled panic. "All sensor arrays are reporting normal function, but we have no contacts on any tracking system. Whatever attacked us appears to be completely invisible to our detection methods." Zexai moved to the main tactical display, staring at readings that showed his fleet scattered and disabled without any indication of enemy presence. "That's impossible. No known technology can achieve complete sensor invisibility while maintaining enough power output for weapons of this magnitude." "High Commander," his communications officer interjected, "I'm receiving similar reports from all fleet elements. Every ship has been disabled simultaneously by weapons they couldn't detect or track. The attack duration was less than 1 minute across the entire formation." As the immediate crisis response protocol stabilized the ship's basic systems, Zexai began to understand that he was facing something unprecedented in his military experience. The coordination required for simultaneous strikes against 17 different targets suggested an intelligence network and command structure that operated on a scale the Empire had never encountered. More troubling, the precision of the attacks indicated detailed knowledge of Zeltharian ship design that no resistance movement should have possessed. "Sir," his intelligence officer said, consulting data streams from across the fleet, "preliminary damage assessment suggests that all critical systems were targeted with complete accuracy. No random hits, no wasted shots, no collateral damage to non-essential systems. Whoever did this knows our ship designs better than some of our own engineers." It was then that Sarah's voice reached them through a communication frequency that had been thought completely secure. "High Commander Zexai," she said, her words transmitted through quantum relays that bypassed every Imperial encryption system. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Corps. I wanted to make sure you understood exactly what just happened to your fleet." The bridge fell silent except for the low humming of emergency power systems and the distant sounds of damage control teams working throughout the ship. Zexai's skin shifted to colors that none of his officers had ever seen before, combinations that seemed to indicate a mixture of rage, fear, and grudging respect. "Your fleet came here to conduct genetic modification attacks against civilian populations," Sarah continued, her voice reaching every ship in the formation through communication arrays they had thought were impregnable. "Those attacks will not take place. Your ships have been disabled by human technology that your empire didn't know existed." She paused, allowing the implications to settle in among the Imperial officers who were listening to this unprecedented breach of their security. "This is what happens when you mistake diplomatic restraint for military weakness. This is what happens when you threaten innocent populations while assuming that humans won't fight back." Zexai activated his own communication array, broadcasting on all frequencies in an attempt to locate and respond to this impossible transmission. "Human, your attack represents an act of war against the Zeltharian Empire. Do you understand the consequences of what you have done?" Sarah's response carried undertones of something that the Universal Translator rendered as controlled satisfaction. "High Commander, What I understand is that your empire has been operating under false assumptions about human capabilities for far too long. Today, those assumptions end. The tactical displays throughout the Imperial fleet began showing new contacts as Sarah's assault teams emerged from stealth around the disabled warships. The craft that appeared seemed to operate on principles that violated every assumption about space combat that the Zeltharians had developed over centuries of expansion. You're looking at 12 human specialists operating equipment that represents decades of technological development, Sarah explained as her assault craft maneuvered around the Sovereign Glory with casual disregard for the ship's defensive capabilities. We've been preparing for this moment since the day we realized that peaceful coexistence might not be possible with powers that view conquest as their natural right. Zexay watched the alien craft through his viewports, noting design features and performance characteristics that suggested technological principles his people couldn't comprehend.
What do you want, human?
What are your terms? My terms are simple, Sarah replied. Withdraw your fleet from the Kepler sector immediately. Cancel all genetic modification programs targeting indigenous populations. End the forced education programs that are systematically destroying local cultures. And if we refuse? Sarah's assault craft moved closer to the command bridge, its weapons arrays tracking targeting systems that could disable the ship's life support with surgical precision. Then you'll discover that today's demonstration was just the beginning of what human military technology can accomplish. It was then that Control's voice reached Sarah, through their secure communication channel, with information that changed everything about the strategic situation. Lieutenant, I'm receiving priority intelligence from Terran Strategic Command. Similar operations are confirming success in 16 other sectors. The Kresh Collective and the Ethereal Consensus are both requesting immediate diplomatic contact with human representatives. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest as the full implications became clear. The coordinated demonstrations hadn't just disrupted imperial expansion, they had fundamentally altered the balance of power in galactic politics. For the first time in history, humanity had demonstrated military capabilities that forced other species to reconsider their assumptions about human weakness. High Commander, she said, her voice carrying a new authority that came from representing a power that could no longer be ignored. You have 1 hour to begin fleet withdrawal from this sector. Any attempt to continue operations against civilian populations will result in the complete destruction of your military assets. Zexai's skin shifted through several color combinations before settling on a pale yellow that Sarah's intelligence briefings had identified as indicating reluctant acceptance of superior force. The Zeltharian Empire will remember this day, human. This attack will not go unanswered. The entire galaxy will remember this day, Sarah replied. And they'll remember that humanity chose to protect innocent people when the major powers chose to ignore genocide. They'll remember that diplomatic restraint isn't the same as military weakness. She paused, watching through her viewports as Imperial fleet elements began the complex process of withdrawing from their attack formations. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, and my battle name is Guardian of the Silent. When your empire reports what happened here, make sure they use that name correctly. The communication channel fell silent as Sarah's assault teams began their own withdrawal to predetermined rally points throughout the system. The demonstration was complete, but Sarah knew that the real consequences were just beginning to unfold across the galaxy. Over the following days, as the Zeltharian fleet limped away from the Kepler sector and diplomatic channels throughout the galaxy buzzed with reports of unprecedented human military action, Sarah remained with her team to help establish the new reality that their intervention had created. The indigenous populations of 17 worlds found themselves free to develop their own cultures without imperial interference. Resistance movements throughout the galaxy began receiving support from sources they couldn't identify but suspected were human. Most importantly, the Galactic Council found itself forced to include human representatives in meaningful decision-making for the first time in the organization's history. Lieutenant, Zara said during one of their final meetings before Sarah's team prepared to return to Earth, our people will remember what you did here. Guardian of the Silent, the name fits. Sarah looked out across the forest that would now be allowed to grow according to its own rhythms rather than imperial.